Whether you're a new Empire at War Expanded player or a veteran with hundreds or even thousands of hours in Thrawn's Revenge or Fall of the Republic, you're still almost definitely using anti-fighter corvettes incorrectly, and I'm even including myself in this. For new players especially though, they'll often wonder why they're unable to deal with large numbers of fighters as they send all their big boy ships in, even though they have a couple Corellian corvettes around, and if this sounds like you, then stick around. Today we're going to talk about how these units actually work, and how you should plan around them using a brand new tool called Science. To start off with, we're going to use a pretty standard example in Fall of the Republic, with fleet compositions which aren't too far off of what you may normally see in the mod, given its carrier-heavy era. I'm in the instant action game mode as the Republic with 2 Venators, 1 Invincible, 2 Acclimators, 1 ISD, and 5 Corellian corvettes, for a total of about 183 pop cap. On the CIS's side, there are 6 Captors, 8 C9979 carriers, a Providence Dreadnought, and a Bulwark 2, giving them a total of about 176 pop cap. I'm not really giving many commands here in this battle, but you'll see that while our fleet does eventually win, it's pretty close and we take a lot of losses, mostly because even though our battleships are able to handle the enemy carriers pretty easily, we don't have much of an answer to their fighters and bombers, who have been able to go around throughout the battle doing a ton of damage. We have a decent amount of carriers in our fleet as well, but it's proportionally way higher for the CIS in this battle. The important thing to remember with credit and population cap costs while you're building fleets in EaWX is that these are assigned based on consistent values. So if a ship costs 2,500 credits, that's a direct reflection of health, shield, DPS, and fighter power, rather than being a number we determined with a blindfold and a dartboard, given the volume of HR complaints that method used to incur. Things do get deeper than that, but that's the general gist of how it works, and it gives a number which is called the combat power, which is both what the AI uses to determine ship values in Empire at War, and the value against which costs are determined for our systems. When determining which ships to build, the AI will add on top of that factors like direct counters via category masks, which tells the game a role the ship fills. For example, if it's a corvette, if it's anti-fighter, if it's a capital, anti-capital, anti-corvette, and so on. Within that, as the categories show, every ship is going to have its own strengths and weaknesses. So if you are running a fleet that's carrier heavy and making 180-ish pop cap of carriers go against 180 pop cap of battle cruisers, the carriers themselves aren't going to stand up very well directly to the enemy battleships. The bombers and the fighters are going to be where all that damage is coming from, and this is why you always want to make balanced fleets with different roles depending on what you're going to be fighting. Being able to put those carriers behind something that's a bit tankier is going to get you a lot further than just sending your carriers in on the front line. And that's the same logic that should tell you if you're going with those battle cruisers against a bunch of fighters that you're going to want a lot more anti-fighter than most players end up using. The CIS's C9979 carriers are some of the biggest examples of this. They're a 5 pop cap unit, of which 1 pop cap is from the strength of the ship itself, versus 4 pop from the fighter complement. So we're seeing a ton of fighter strength in this battle come from those carriers. And while 5 may sound like a lot of CR90s and like that should be enough to carry the whole battle for you, that's only 5 pop cap worth of units focusing purely on anti-fighter and anti-bomber duties, our own fighters aside. In a full fleet battle, that's 2.5% of your total available power. So if we just shift our strategy a little bit, we can see that we'll get much better results. For this second example, I've kept the fleet comps the same as last time for the most part. But I've added 15 more CR90s, meaning 15 pop cap and equivalent credit cost worth, along with 1 more captor to the CIS, which itself is 13 pop cap and equivalent credit cost. So this is about the same thing being added to each faction if you just look at the raw power and don't consider the roles they're bringing to the table. So now in this new fleet makeup, we have about 20 pop cap worth of units directly focusing on anti-fighter duties compared to 5 before. And this is still just about 10% of the total amount of ships that we'd be able to bring into a regular battle. That's going up against about 100 pop worth of fighters from the various carrier types in the fleet. To be clear, that's not 100 pop cap worth of carriers, that's 100 pop cap worth of just the fighters from those carriers. Reserves, meaning replacement units which spawn after one wave of fighters or bombers dies, do factor into that number, but at a significantly lower rate per wave than the first ones do. Now, because we're focusing on countering what they're doing, even just having a quarter to a fifth as much of our fleet power being dedicated towards anti-fighters as theirs is to just the fighter portion of their carriers means that even without me giving active in-battle commands, we're about to come out way ahead of where we were in the first example. And that's true despite our Invincible, our biggest and most powerful ship, being essentially written off at the start because of worse positioning when the battle started. So let's jump over to Thrawn's Revenge and take a look at another example. Here we're going to have 10 Quasars at 6 total pop each, with 3.5 of that dedicated to their fighters. Then there's 2 MC-90s, which do have fighters, but not the most significant amounts for our purposes today. Then there's 2 Endurances, which have about 10 of their 26 pop cap determined by fighters, and a Nebula, which, similar to the MC-90, has some fighters but no bombers. So the overall pop cap there is only about 1 point for the fighters, because the anti-ship damage of bombers is what really adds up. So that's about 206 overall pop cap for the New Republic. 55 of which is going towards bombers. So this isn't quite as skewed as the CIS fleets were, which is a lot more typical of the Clone Wars than the Thrawn's Revenge era, even though the New Republic is definitely one of the factions that's more focused on their fighters. But those fighters and bombers are going to be running a lot of interference for the rest of the New Republic fleet. On our side we have 4 Lancers, 3 ISDs, 4 VSDs, and 2 Acclamator 2s, putting us at a slightly lower 189 pop cap, but roughly even. While the other ship's weapons and our own fighters can definitely help against the enemy fighters and bombers, our fighters are significantly outnumbered and our ship's guns have better things to do than shoot the enemy fighters and bombers. So it's really up to the Lancers to stop all that damage in a fight that's very much about the bombers from the New Republic side, meaning we're about to lose pretty hard. Lancers are worth 3 pops, so they're equivalent to having 3 CR90s in raw stats, meaning we're a bit ahead of where we were with the Republic in the 5 CR90s, but there's another factor here that plays a huge role: area coverage and positioning. That isn't reflected in raw stat numbers. You can see a few different blobs of bombers moving around, but with 4 Lancers, they can't get anything done fast enough. Beyond just their ability to kill fighters, keep in mind that all ships with rapid lasers, which means every dedicated anti-fighter ship, including the Lancer, has a persistent point defense ability. So on top of killing those enemy fighters, you can take down the effectiveness of the enemy bombers before they're even dead by shooting down the munitions. The recharge rate for this is shown in the unit stat card at the bottom. So with 4 Lancers, while we can have some local protection, the bombers and fighters are just able to go elsewhere and take apart a ship before our Lancers can respond. In this next battle, I've swapped out one of our 4 VSDs for 8 extra Lancers, giving us a much wider spread of anti-fighter coverage, and bringing us up to about 36 pop cap worth of anti-fighter. The only micro I'm still doing is giving the Lancers a few quick attack orders, which I did in the prior Empire example as well, even though I left them more alone in the CIS versus Republic ones. You'll see we're able to pretty quickly rip through the enemy bombers, especially when I do any amount of micro, dropping their effective combat power by a ton, and the massive point defense coverage means we're hitting way more bombs on the way in too. One important element of the coverage for this is that Empire at War's targeting for point defense is weird. So if your ships are close enough together, they're going to try to hit the same bomb. This will obviously reduce their effectiveness, so try to keep them at least a little spaced out and make sure that bombers aren't able to sneak into your fleet another way. Either way, we go from a complete loss at close to parity in overall ship power to a pretty overwhelming victory with little to no player intervention, based entirely on switching out 1 Victory 2 for a roughly equivalent amount of credits and pop in anti-fighter power. Sure, as a scientific paper, this may get sent back for more review because I used instant action to set up the fleets rather than the map editor, so the positioning is a bit different and that will impact things. But I wanted to do something that any of you can easily recreate by playing around in instant action yourselves. It's a great place to try different fleet compositions and see what will work in different situations, or see just how important these kinds of counters are. A lot of players, especially new players, first instinct is just to throw together the biggest ships they can and just go at it. But there's a lot more to think about if you're struggling to pull out a win, or if you want to take on some of the higher difficulty levels in the mod. Hopefully this has helped a few of you, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.